Karen Blythe was known for her compassion, Jeremy Cross for his temper. But when her lifeless body was found in her locked apartment, and his name surfaced from a blurry reflection caught by a street camera, a horrifying truth began to unfold. One planned every step of the way, and the other never saw it coming. Brindlewood was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbours by name. Nestled between quiet hills and sleepy back roads, it was the last place anyone expected a murder. That's why, when 36-year-old Karen Blythe was found dead in her apartment on a warm Thursday morning, the entire community was shaken. Karen was a nurse at Brindlewood Regional Hospital, well liked and respected by both patients and colleagues. She lived alone in a modest second-floor unit in a small apartment complex not far from the town square. On the night she died, Karen was supposed to be on a night shift. When she failed to show up or call in, her co-worker assumed she had fallen ill. But by morning, concern had turned into worry. It was her neighbour, an elderly woman who lived across the hall, who noticed something was wrong. Karen's door was slightly ajar. At first, she assumed Karen had gone out in a hurry, but something about the silence inside didn't sit right. She called the building superintendent, who in turn called the police. Officers arrived just before 9 a.m. and stepped cautiously into the apartment. What they found inside was disturbing. Karen's body was lying face down in her living room. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, but her limbs were twisted unnaturally, and there was bruising on the side of her head. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Her phone, wallet, and keys were still on the kitchen counter. Nothing appeared to be stolen. But what caught the officers' attention most was the faint smell of gasoline and a small burned patch of carpet near the body. A lighter was found not far away. It looked like someone had attempted to set the body, and possibly the apartment, on fire. But for some reason, the flames hadn't spread. It was as if the fire had started and then stopped on its own. The scene was bizarre. There was no broken window, no pried open door. Karen's front door lock was intact, which meant whoever had done this either had a key or was let in willingly. The only damage was the scorched carpet and the faint traces of accelerant in the air. Detectives on the scene quickly ruled out natural causes. This was a homicide, and a strange one at that. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed that Karen had been struck on the head with significant force, rendering her unconscious. The blow didn't kill her immediately. She may have been alive, though barely, when the fire was set. That single, horrifying detail made the crime all the more disturbing. Who would do something like this to someone like Karen? As the investigation got underway, officers began canvassing the building. Neighbours were questioned. Friends and co-workers were called. But no one had seen or heard anything unusual that night. The only clues lay within the walls of the apartment, and possibly in the silent electronic eyes of the building's security system. The search for answers had begun, and the truth was about to reveal itself in the most unexpected way. The investigation into Karen Blythe's death moved quickly, but with each passing hour, the case grew more puzzling. Detectives focused their attention on the apartment complex's security system, hoping the surveillance footage would offer the answers the crime scene did not. The building was equipped with a modest CCTV setup. Several cameras in the lobby, hallways and parking areas, all monitored by a basic digital recorder. Investigators pulled the footage from the night of the murder, looking for anything unusual. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Residents entered and exited the building throughout the evening. Karen was seen returning home from the grocery store around 7:10 p.m., carrying 2 bags. She looked calm. Nothing appeared out of place. She entered her apartment and was not seen again. But as detectives reviewed the footage from the hallway outside her door, they noticed something odd. At exactly 8:42 p.m., the camera feed went black. The screen remained dark for precisely 2 minutes, then came back online. When the video resumed, it showed a tall figure in a dark hoodie walking away from Karen's apartment door. The figure moved calmly, head down, avoiding eye contact with the lens. They turned down the stairwell and vanished from view. The door to Karen's apartment remained closed. It was the only unusual activity caught by the hallway camera that night, and the timing was too precise to ignore. Investigators suspected the blackout was no accident. Someone had deliberately disabled the camera, committed the crime, and then re-enabled it before leaving. Attention turned to how the blackout had occurred. The building's superintendent confirmed that the camera system was not highly secure. The hallway camera was mounted near the ceiling, and while tampering wasn't easy, it was possible for someone who knew what they were doing. The feed had been interrupted at the source. Someone had manually unplugged the camera's power cord from the utility closet down the hall, a room that was usually locked but had been found slightly open the next morning. With this discovery, the case shifted. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was premeditated. The killer had known where the camera was, how to disable it, and likely how to enter the building without drawing attention. Detectives reviewed footage from the building's main entrance, expecting to see the figure arriving earlier that night. But they found nothing. No one matching the suspect's build had entered through the front door. Curious, they checked the parking garage footage. That's when they caught the figure on a different camera, entering the building through a side emergency exit, one that was supposed to be alarmed and locked at all times. The intruder had slipped in without triggering any alerts, staying out of view until the moment they approached Karen's apartment. Whoever this person was, they had planned everything carefully. They knew the building's weak spots. They came prepared, avoided detection, and vanished before anyone noticed. The figure's identity remained unknown, but the method was clear. This was no random attack. Someone had hunted Karen Blythe. Detectives now had a mystery figure and a carefully orchestrated crime, but they were still missing a name. The suspect had avoided nearly all the building's cameras, slipping in through a side door, disabling the hallway feed, and escaping unnoticed. But no matter how meticulous the plan, there's always a margin for error, and that's where technology offered a break. Just across the street from the apartment complex stood an ATM, positioned at the edge of a small convenience store. The machine had its own security camera, angled outward to capture anyone making a withdrawal. Its lens, designed to prevent fraud, happened to face part of the building's parking garage entrance. Investigators decided to pull the ATM footage on a hunch, hoping for even the smallest clue. What they found was subtle but significant. Around 9 p.m., shortly after the blackout and reactivation of the hallway camera, the ATM captured a reflection on the glass door of the apartment building. A tall figure in a hoodie could be seen stepping into the street. As they passed under a nearby streetlight, their head turned slightly, just enough to offer a partial side profile. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was something. Detectives ran the image through facial recognition software used by law enforcement databases. Several matches came back, but one stood out: Jeremy Cross, 38, with a prior history of domestic violence. His name raised immediate red flags. Jeremy was Karen Blythe's ex-boyfriend. The two had dated nearly 2 years ago, and while the relationship was short-lived, Karen had mentioned to close friends that Jeremy had become controlling toward the end. She had never reported him to the police, but friends said she cut all ties abruptly after one frightening encounter. That was over a year ago. Jeremy's last known address was in another state, more than 200 miles away. Public records showed no recent activity tying him to Brindlewood. He had no family in town, no reason to be there, or so it seemed. When detectives looked closer, they discovered Jeremy had recently rented a car using a prepaid card. The vehicle had passed through a highway toll booth camera less than an hour from Brindlewood on the day of the murder. He was close enough. The pieces were coming together. Jeremy had no job, no stable home, and no clear direction in life. He drifted between motels, worked odd jobs, and avoided social media entirely. Detectives believed he may have been stalking Karen without her knowledge. With the ATM footage, the rental car evidence, and the known connection to the victim, Jeremy became the prime suspect. Still, they needed more. It was possible someone else had used the rental car. The image on the ATM wasn't a full match. Investigators obtained a warrant to track the rental car's GPS history. The results showed it had stopped in Brindlewood for several hours on the night of the murder and parked just 1 block away from Karen's apartment building. It was becoming clear. Jeremy hadn't just returned to Brindlewood. He had come with a purpose. And even though he had tried to hide every step, the technology he counted on avoiding had quietly recorded his trail. Detectives moved quickly. With mounting evidence pointing to Jeremy Cross, they tracked him down to a rundown roadside motel in a small town across the state line. The motel clerk confirmed he had checked in 2 nights earlier under a fake name. His car, the same rental flagged by the GPS tracker, was parked outside in a gravel lot, dusty and streaked with dried mud. Investigators approached carefully. Jeremy was taken into custody without incident, but he looked tired and disheveled, as if he hadn't slept in days. Inside the motel room, police found little at first: an empty pizza box, a duffel bag, and some crumpled clothes. But the real discoveries were in the trunk of the rental car. Hidden beneath a pile of blankets was a red gas canister, half full. Nearby were a pair of dark gloves and a sweatshirt with burn marks along one sleeve. Forensic teams took the items into evidence immediately. It was exactly what they had hoped to find and feared. Back in Brindlewood, crime scene technicians compared the gloves to the DNA found at the scene. The results were conclusive. Traces of Karen's blood and skin cells were present inside the gloves, proving they had been worn during the crime. The sweatshirt's burn pattern also matched the scorch marks found on the carpet in Karen's living room. Fibers from the fabric were consistent with those found at the apartment. Everything was starting to fall into place. When questioned, Jeremy was calm at first. He denied everything. He said he hadn't seen Karen in over a year and had no reason to hurt her. He claimed he'd been in his motel room the entire night of the murder, watching television and resting. But when detectives asked about the rental car's GPS history and the items in his trunk, his confidence began to falter. Confronted with the gloves and the gas can, he changed his story. He admitted to being in Brindlewood but claimed he had only wanted to speak with Karen to clear the air. He insisted he never intended to harm her. According to him, things had gotten out of hand and he panicked. He wouldn't go into detail about what happened inside the apartment, but he didn't deny being there. When asked how he got into the building, Jeremy admitted he had been watching the place for several days. He said he learned the side door didn't always latch properly and waited until the right moment to slip in unnoticed. He had brought the gas can just to scare her, he claimed, though no one believed that explanation. What stood out most was his familiarity with the building's layout. He knew where the cameras were, where to unplug the hallway feed, and how to stay out of sight. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It had been planned. Jeremy had spent days preparing for the moment, and though he tried to destroy the evidence with fire, He didn't count on the fire failing, or the camera he never saw across the street. His calculated steps had left behind a clear path, and it all led straight to him. Jeremy Cross was officially charged with the murder of Karen Blythe just 3 days after his arrest. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but it was the collection of small, overlooked details that truly sealed the case. Investigators pieced together the timeline using surveillance footage, GPS data, and forensic evidence, each part filling in gaps the killer thought he had erased. The most damning detail came not from inside the apartment, but from the ATM camera across the street. That single moment, a subtle reflection on a glass door, gave detectives the first glimpse of the person responsible. It was grainy, blurred, and nearly missed during initial review. But once enhanced and analysed, it provided the lead that everything else hinged on. Jeremy had tried to be invisible. He had disabled the hallway camera, used a hidden entrance, and wore dark clothes to mask his identity. But he failed to notice the silent observer across the street, quietly recording his exit. During trial, prosecutors walked the jury through each step of Jeremy's plan. They presented the timeline with precision. How he arrived in town days earlier, rented a car under a false name, and scoped out Karen's building. They showed his arrival through the emergency exit, the 2-minute camera blackout, and the moment he slipped away. Then came the forensic evidence, the gloves, the gas can, and the burned clothing. Every item linked him directly to the crime scene. Karen's family sat silently in the courtroom as the prosecution described how Jeremy had struck her from behind, then attempted to cover up the crime by setting fire to the apartment. But the fire never spread. Investigators later learned that the carpet material, combined with low oxygen levels in the room, caused the flames to sputter out before any real damage was done. It was a failure that preserved the crime scene, and ultimately, the truth. Jeremy's defense argued that the act wasn't premeditated, claiming he only wanted to confront Karen and that the situation spiraled out of control. But the jury wasn't convinced. His actions, unplugging the camera, entering through a side door, wearing gloves, and attempting to start a fire, spoke of careful planning, not a moment of rage. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Jeremy Cross to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Karen's family, though devastated by their loss, found some relief in knowing justice had been served. Still, the scars left behind by her death ran deep. Karen had been a kind, dedicated woman who helped others every day, only to fall victim to someone from her past who refused to let go. In the end, it was technology that spoke for Karen when she no longer could. The quiet eyes of a street camera, the data from a GPS tracker, the digital trail left behind. All of it formed a voice that revealed the truth. Jeremy tried to erase his presence, but the footage told the real story. A chilling crime, solved by silent witnesses that never blinked.